Now this will round off our discussion of different types of policy instruments. We started with government regulation and standards, and then talked about more market-based carrot and stick approaches, and this is sort of a different class of energy policies, sort of more institutional, kind of the government's role as a leader in the energy sector, and influencing our behavior, and so basically the first class of these other policy instruments is what I call information or motivation. So the government, has at its arm, a big communication, wing. It can put out information campaigns about the benefits of reducing energy, or can make people aware of climate change. And it can also give people more information about the type of energy that they're using, the carbon impact of the appliances that they use. And here's one example. So from an EU directive starting in the 1990s, which established energy consumption labelling scheme. Basically, most white goods, light bulbs, and cars must have an EU energy label, which displays basically their energy efficiency class, whether they're A, which is the most efficient, to G, the least efficient, and it can show people the number of kilowatt hours, or the cost, or the emissions that they will kind of emit in a typical year or a typical cycle by doing these things. And that's because consumers can't change their behavior unless they have information. So here, this EU directive is one such sort of information instrument that can help that. A second class of instruments, then I'll call it kind of infrastructural. Obviously, the energy sector is sort of highly dependent on different types of infrastructure, which the government plays a big role in either operating or regulating. In the case of the electricity system, here's the Irish transmission system, electricity transmission grid, and the infrastructure of wires and cables around the country is managed by very either state-owned companies or very highly regulated companies. So it's divided into the transmission network, which is high voltage, and distribution network, which is low voltage. So EirGrid is a state-owned entity responsible for operating and planning the development of the transmission system. So the electricity generated passes into this distribution network at these points, and the distribution network then sends electricity supply to people's premises, to businesses and homes. ESB Networks then is the organization. It's a licensed operator, part of the ESB group, which operates the low voltage distribution network, which is responsible for operating, maintaining, and developing the electricity distribution grid. But EirGrid, which is the state-owned company, is responsible for developing and operating the national electricity grid. Basically, it ensures that the power is always available where it's needed. It forecasts, wind, wind speeds, so wind generation, it forecasts demands, and that it ensures the balancing of supply and demand at all the time. Another part of the electricity system there are interconnectors, basically how our transmission system is connected to our neighbouring countries. And we have several interconnectors with Great Britain, which allow us to basically export electricity when our cost is low, or the supply, for example, from wind energy is high, or it can allow us to import electricity when demand is high, or the cost is low, from Britain is low. The Celtic Interconnector will be a new interconnector. It's 700 megawatt high voltage electricity interconnector, which will run from East Cork to Brittany in France. And the interconnector will be nearly 600 kilometres long, most of it underwater. It will cost around about €1 billion. At its full capacity, it will be able to power about 500,000 homes in Ireland. The project is jointly proposed by EirGrid and its French counterpart, the transmission system operator in France. And in 2019, the EU announced a decision to basically award half of these funds towards constructing the Celtic Interconnector. Here's a big role of the state in investing in huge infrastructure like this. this wouldn't be done by the market alone, but it is really, really important for energy security and also for enabling this flexibility in the grid to allow a large penetration of variable renewables. The Greenlink interconnector then is another interconnector that's planned to connect with Pembroke and Wales to Wexford, which has a similar purpose. The natural gas grid then is similarly state-owned. Oh, there we go. This is the natural gas pipeline map. It's part of, it's run by Gas Networks Ireland, GNI, which is part of Airvia, which is a semi-state organisation. Again, a huge role of the state here in operating the pipelines. Another example, examples of infrastructure there are the EV charging network. If it was led to the kind of free market alone, we wouldn't be building up an EV charging network. Public transport is the same. The government puts a big kind of financial heft behind different parts of public transport. There's the National Road Network, managed by Transport Infrastructure Ireland, which is obviously the government plays a huge role in developing, giving the budget for. And the final class of, I suppose, infrastructure. Is it infrastructure? I don't know. But I'll call it innovation and research development and deployment of innovation, basically. For example, the government, through Science Foundation Ireland, funds MARI, the Centre for Climate, Energy and Marine, which funds tens of millions of euros worth of research on marine energy, on energy policy research modelling, and low carbon biofuels, things like that, and on climate resilience. Next is a class of policies. There's not quite policy instruments, but the role of the government in creating this institutional environment. For example, here, this is from a recent discussion paper that we published on the role of carbon budgets in translating the Paris Agreement into national climate policy. You can look that up if you're interested. It's quite an in-depth look at what carbon budgets are. But here is an illustrative or a hypothetical governance structure for Ireland in terms of all the different players and what role they have in managing and setting up carbon budgets. So this is the Climate Change Advisory Council, who are an independent advisory authority who may have the role of advising on carbon budgets. It's not set into policy yet as I am recording. There are different government departments, for example, the Department of Climate Action and Communications Networks, now it's called DEC, the Oireachtas and different committees there, regional offices. There are different end-use sectors and different, there's a Climate Action Delivery Board in the Department of Taoiseach. And basically, there's different people across government, different organisations who advise. And for monitoring progress, making data like the Environmental Protection Agency. Other examples of institutions involved in our energy sector are those ensuring the security of supply. For example, the International Energy Agency requires that we keep 90 days of oil reserves, and those are administered by NORA, N-O-R-A. There is also the Commission for Regulation of Utilities is Ireland's independent energy regulator, and they also have the basically designated responsibility to ensure the electricity sector and that the natural gas sector are prepared for risk. So there's an EU regulation in 2019 which sets out a framework on how electricity crisis should be managed, and the CRU, the Commission for Regulation of Utilities, is our authority there. And the CRU is also designed to give protection to consumers, to ensure competition in the generation and supply of electricity and supply of natural gas, basically to protect the interests of energy consumers and also to maintain the security of supply. Different organisations then involved in planning and development include on board Planola, who use the wind energy development guidelines to assist local planning authorities to develop a wind farm and give planning permission for wind farms. Then the Department of Housing Planning and Local Government, working with the Department of environment and climate change. They're developing a new marine planning and development management bill, which is needed really to enable Ireland's offshore wind development. So again, zoning is important here, allowing us to bring ashore electricity from offshore wind farms is unnecessary. So that gives some kind of big picture overview of the different forms of ways that government and policy play in the energy sector. It's huge. This is just a taster, really. And then a final section of this week will be a short video on maybe unintended consequences or how policy has to weigh up co-benefits and trade-offs between different energy policy priorities.